turn this on because I know we're going to need it. The handout that I gave you for the people online, I've uploaded a copy of it to files on Canvas. And basically, we're on page 99 talking about stream drainage. Have you ever been someplace where you watched a stream get bigger and bigger and bigger while it was raining? One time I had a friend who took me fishing on a river while it was raining, and we were sitting there. Whoops, that's not what I want. There. We were sitting there fishing, and I'm watching the logs float down the stream, and I'd go back up and watch something else float down the stream, and pretty soon I started feeling kind of dizzy and sick to my stomach, and this guy started laughing, and I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "I've never seen somebody get seasick sitting on the bank of a river." And I go, "What?" So, needless to say, I'm not interested in going deep sea fishing. If sitting at a riverbank makes me seasick, just watching the water go by, I'm staying off of the ocean. But the second experience I had with a stream was out in Colorado when I was fishing for brook trout, and I found out that on the other side of the little stream where I was fishing, well, it wasn't just a little stream, it was about as wide as from here, probably out to the sidewalk out there. And so I walked across the stream to the other side because the water was only about this deep. So I walked across the stream to fish on the other side, and I saw some clouds up in the mountains. Have any of you been to Colorado to see clouds up in the mountains? And so that I could see it was raining, but I thought, well, the clouds aren't here yet, so I don't need to get to the other side till the clouds get closer. The clouds were pouring down rain up in the mountains. Does that tell you what was happening to the level of the water in the stream? It was going up, and I wasn't paying attention. Got you, Drake.
Thank you.
And I wasn't paying attention. And by the time I noticed that the water was getting pretty high, I started back, and on the way over it was below my knee. On the way back it was above my knee. And I'm walking across this stream in Colorado, and I'm walking on this gravel, and pretty soon I start sliding downstream on the gravel because the water was so strong, it was pushing me downstream. I thought, oh no, I am in serious trouble. But I was halfway across, so it was either go back or make my way across. So I went ahead and got across and learned a scary lesson about streams in Colorado. Now, the reason I gave this handout is people who live in Nebraska need to learn a scary lesson. By looking at this little picture of Nebraska, why do you think Nebraska has had so much flooding? Look at those little lines and see where the line ends is where it actually starts. So there are 3 rivers that start in Colorado and Wyoming and run into Nebraska. No, keep going up. There are 5 rivers that run into the Missouri River that runs through eastern Nebraska. You see what's going on? Nebraska has so many streams going through their state. In fact, if you go to the internet and Google Nebraska rivers or Nebraska streams, you will see a lot more than what this map shows. And the other handout I gave you was the one that kind of shows the Mississippi River and the Missouri River. And can you see where You know how far away the Rocky Mountains are, right? The mountain range. Okay, all the water on this side of the mountain range flows into the Missouri from upstream, and then down, and then from the Missouri it goes into the Mississippi. And of course the downstream, the lower part of that mountainous region, it goes through Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas and runs into the Mississippi River down there. But I mean, if you just want to, if you've never lived close to a big river before, it probably is worth your time to drive across the bridge and just look to see how big the Missouri River is, and recognize that the water that's coming down that river has been coming from way up in the Rocky Mountains and working its way down. And as this and all that snow they got out there, as that snow melts and turns into water, it starts running this direction and filling up the streams and flooding Nebraska because Nebraska is so flat. So they're catching a lot of the flood water. And why aren't we being flooded? Because Missouri, Kansas City, is so much higher up. I mean, if you drive down across the river, you'll notice that you go down a hill and then up on the other side, because the river's in a big indentation, so there's not going to be flooding up here on the hill where we live. Now, down below the hill, between Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas City, Kansas, there's a big floodplain. And Kansas City has built large banks to keep the river from flooding that. But every now and then, the river gets too big for it, and it floods it. And there's a picture on page 101 of a floodplain. But just be aware. Can you see, does that make sense, where this river makes this big turn like that? That when the river gets out of its banks, it's going to flood all that area where there's light blue. So if you decide to someday live in a little bend of a river, because it's so picturesque, just make a note that Dr. Bonine told me that I was going to get flooded someday. And the reason you were able to buy that land so cheap is because it's in a floodplain. Some guy in Kansas City finds out that there's a piece of land that he can buy real cheap, and he buys it and puts down some concrete little slabs and turns it into a mobile home park. And what happens when the river floods? The mobile homes float away. Because the people who parked their mobile home there didn't ask, are you in a floodplain? And he didn't tell them. But if he has a house there, don't be surprised if his house isn't built down in the bottom of the floodplain, it's built up on a hill. So that when the trailer court floods, where everybody's home floats away, he still is high and dry and safe up on the hill. So that tells you he knew something about the floodplain. He just didn't tell you about it. On page 102, it shows, I don't know if you enjoy this picture or not, but have you noticed when you go to Google or you go someplace and look at rivers, they have this serpentine effect to them? Well, if the Missouri River was just one great big straight channel, the water would just keep going faster and faster and faster as it moves downstream. And by the time it got to St. Louis to hit the Mississippi River, it would be going so fast that East St. Louis would be inundated with water on a regular basis. So God just created the world that He made with these little serpentine effect for rivers, so that the river comes rushing around one bend and crashes into another, and it kind of keeps it slowing down as it goes downstream. So be thankful for that serpentine effect, but also realize that that serpentine effect, have any of you ever gone to one of these covered bridges in Missouri? There's a covered bridge up in northern Missouri, and I had never seen a covered bridge, so I wanted to go see it. So I drove up there, and I pull into the parking lot, and here's this bridge that's just over dirt. And I said, "Where's the river?" And they go, "Oh, it's 5 miles east of here." And I go, "Then why is the bridge here? Did you guys move it?" He goes, "No, the river moved." Have you ever seen a river move? I mean, it goes so slow that people don't notice it. But can you see where it eats away at one bank and builds up on the other, and it moves? In fact, have any of you been to that place downtown where they dug up that Arabia, where they dug up an old ship? They found it out in a farmer's field, and they dug it up and put all the artifacts from the 1800s in this museum downtown. Well, that boat was dug out of the ground about 5 miles away from the river, because that's where the river used to go. So rivers change with time. I mean, it's slow enough where you don't notice it, but they change with time. But it could be that you could buy a house on the bank of the river, and your house eventually disappears, but the guy who lives on the other side of the river will eventually be a mile away from the river, because it's building up on your side. So it's one of the things is to look to see how have rivers changed their courses. There's so much you can look at on the internet. Mostly I'm going to try to use the internet, the things I do in class here, to help you see things that are kind of hard to comprehend. I think most of this stuff is easy to comprehend when we run through this chapter. If it isn't, then send me an email, write me a question, and I will go back and talk about it later. One of the questions I asked you to answer in the discussion page was, why is ice, wind, does the book put ice, wind, and waves under the same category? Did anyone figure out why the book puts ice, wind, and waves? What do they have in common? Glaciers, what do they do? The snow accumulates up high in the mountains, and it pushes down the hillside and digs out the ground. The ice falls, the wind blows. So the glaciers erode land, wind erodes land, and waves erode land. It talks about on page 106 and 107 the impact of past glaciations. And it talks about on page 107 how retreating glaciers left sand and gravel deposits capable of yielding a large supply of high quality groundwater. Figure 3.33. Where is that one? 3.33. Find 3.33.
It's on page 110.
On where?
Page 110.
3.33. Glacier deposits in Long Island, New York. Huh. Well, I like 3.32 better when I look at that one. Maybe because I'm from the Midwest and not from New York. And can you see how those glaciers, as they come down, they carve out these huge big trenches that become sources of groundwater. Now, do any of you know where we get the drinking water that we have here on campus? You don't want to know. Again, my wife says, too much information. Too much information. Did anyone know that Kansas City is under a boil order, or they were a few days ago? Why were they under a boil order? Anyone know? Say no? All I know is they said boil the water before you drink it or you might get sick.
Because the flooding made the reservoirs of water contaminated.
Because the water in the river is so high that it's flooding Kansas City, Missouri's intake pipes where they collect water from the river and purify it and send it through the tap so we can have drinking water. And the flood is so high it's compromised their water purification process. So they've said, boil your water. All of our drinking water comes from the Missouri River. And after you get a drink over there and the water runs down through the pipes into the sewer, does anyone know where the sewer pipe goes? They go back into a sewage treatment plant that treats the sewage and then sends the treated water back into the river. And then it goes downstream, and people in Jefferson City pump their water out of the river. You go, ooh, that's gross. Hey, the people in St. Joe and Leavenworth were pumping the water out and putting it back in before we got it. You just go upstream and they just keep using it. And that's why they have sewage treatment plants to say, okay, you can't just dump raw sewage into the river. I mean, in some countries they do, but if you dump all that raw sewage into the river, by the time it got to Kansas City from St. Joe and Leavenworth and Omaha and all those places up there, it would be so polluted that we couldn't make it drinkable. And we'd have to get our water someplace else. Now, for people in Kansas, that could be a problem. But for us in Missouri, we have another source of water. And I think maybe I'm going to try to find it here for you. Let's turn this on. And let's go over here. Missouri is an unusual state. Do any of you know anything about the springs in Missouri? Missouri Springs. Well, that didn't like it. Okay, let's go Missouri. Missouri Springs. Locations. The 20 largest. Have any of you ever seen a spring? Have any of you ever seen water just bubbling out of the ground somewhere? Where?
Colorado and my farm.
And it's just, what, is it like a big spring or just a little spring?
There's the one in Colorado is pretty big. The one on our farm is tiny.
But it's a spring and it just constantly bubbles up water. And did your great-grandparents own that farm?
No, my grandparents.
Well, the people years ago, before they had refrigeration, guess where they would keep their milk to keep it cool?
In the spring.
In the spring.
Some people built like a house over.
They built a house over the spring where they could keep stuff in there because it was like refrigeration, because it's cold water, isn't it, coming out of there?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Missouri, it says the 20 largest springs, but let me just click on springs in Missouri. And here's a picture of Alley Springs. Here's a picture of Bennett Springs. See that big blue hole up there? That's where the water is coming out of the ground. There's another, there's where the water just comes bubbling up out of there. Big Springs. Whoa, that is huge. Another picture of Big Springs. I mean, it's just coming out so fast it's causing waves. There's another one. There's another one, because Big Springs is really big. Blanchard Springs, there's coming out of the side of those rocks. Blue Spring. You know why they call it Blue Spring, don't you? Because it's blue. Cave Spring, because it comes out of a cave. Cliff Spring, because it comes out of a cliff. Failing Spring. Falling Spring, because it's falling. Lower Greer Spring. Must be close to Greer. Did you know all these springs were in Missouri? Ha-ha-Tonka.
I like that. I like to go there.
Little Bubbling Spring. It's just amazing. Now, let me scroll down here. Look at Big Spring. Look how much water is coming out of Big Spring per day. 200. Now, at maximum, it's 840 million gallons a day, but on average, year-round, it's 276 million. And how much water is that? $276 million gallons.
What?
That's a gallon of water for 276 million people a day. That's a lot of water. That's 10 gallons for 27 million people a day. I mean, a gallon, 276, there's only like 300 million people in the United States. So just from this one spring, we could get a gallon of water, of purified water. Oh, there's a reason the water is pure coming out of Big Springs, is because they've put dye in the water upstream to see where the water runs down underground and goes into Big Spring. So they know what they call the, you can go on the internet and find it. Here at this website, it shows a bunch of the stuff. You can see where the area of ground is, where the water seeps into the ground and goes through the soil, the sand, and it purifies the water. So the pure water is coming out of there. But basically what's happened is the state of Missouri says that since this area of Missouri is where the water goes that feeds Big Spring, you're limited in what you can do in that area. You can't have sewage treatment plants in there. In other words, they do things, and you can't use certain pesticides. They do things to keep that water pure that's coming out of Big Spring. But see, that's just one of them. You understand that Missouri, if all the water gets polluted because everybody's treatment plants quit working and nobody wants to pay the money to fix them, Missouri could be a very wealthy state just by selling water to the rest of the nation. And of course, does everyone know what the two biggest uses of water that each of us makes every day? Again, my wife says too much information. Flushing toilets and taking showers. So if you really want to conserve water, you quit flushing toilets and you quit taking showers. Ew, gross. Well, when I was in Hawaii and I went on a little trip to see a beautiful part of the island that I was staying on. When we got to the place, my wife said, "I need to go to the bathroom, Tom." I'm going, "Well, I hope they have one." And they did. But it wasn't a flush toilet bathroom on the island. It was what you call a nature toilet, where when you use it, you throw leaf and plant stuff down in the toilet, and all of that stuff begins to turn it into compost, where it just turns back into soil, and it doesn't pollute anything. Now, I know some of you go, "That's gross." Well, let me tell you something. All the water that we send back into the sewer that came out of the river has to be treated before Kansas City puts it back in the river. But part of the treatment process is to pull out of the water some of the solids which come from people flushing toilets and putting garbage in their garbage disposal. And what they do is when they skim off those solids, they put them in a drying area, and after it dries and the sun shines on it long enough, the sun kills the bacteria and it kills the germs, and then they use that stuff as fertilizer on fields in the state of Missouri to make the fields more productive. And see, when I tell my wife about this stuff, I go, "Isn't that interesting how we use water?" She goes, "It's disgusting." And I realized, maybe because I grew up on a farm where, you didn't have running water, so you had to live with some of that stuff. That, to me, it's interesting. To her, it was just disgusting. All she wants to know is she can turn the tap on and get clean water, and she can hit the flush thing, and everything's gone. And I'm just saying that it's worth spending some time to learn about our water usage, and how, fortunately, here in the state of Missouri, we have a source of fresh water that's just coming out. And this is just one spring. That one spring actually produces enough water to where if we ran a pipe from Big Spring to Kansas City, it could provide all the water for the greater Kansas City area that we use every day and maintain our present usage. And that would just be one of these springs. But there's a whole bunch of them. That's just the largest one, and the rest of them. But see, Greer Spring is about 214 million gallons per day, and it tells you what county they're in, and it's just a fun website to look at and to see some of the pictures. Okay, I guess the next picture, the next thing on this chapter is on page 111, and it's called coastal erosion. So it's time for us to go see how you find this stuff. This is not rocket science. C-O-A-S-T-A-L, coastal, O-S-I-O-N. Coastal erosion. Well, let's just click on this one. And what did coastal erosion? Images of coastal erosion. I found something I like to look at. Whoops. Let's go back. Is that amazing? The water from the ocean just keeps lapping up against the shore, and that's a road that used to be a road that's just being washed away. Would you like to live in one of those houses along there?
Maybe not forever, but
somebody's in trouble because the road to your house is gone. And you wait a while, your house is going to be gone, And all that's caused by the ocean. Well, they say, yeah, but when I built the house, the ocean was a long ways away. Well, it goes kind of slow, but you can measure it every year. If every year it's taken 3 feet of shoreline, in 10 years it's going to take 30 feet of shoreline. In 100 years, it's going to take 300 feet of shoreline. Well, and can you see somebody saying, well, I didn't think about that when I built the house? Well, there you go. Look at those houses up there. See those pads? Those are pads for people parking trailers. You know why they're empty, don't you? If you had your trailer parked there and you drove up and saw this road gone and all of this caved off to the side and the grass that used to be here is down here, what would you do? Would you hook your trailer up and get it out of there as fast as you could? That's exactly what they did. Now this guy, is that him standing out there looking at what's going on? And can you see people saying, I just didn't see this coming? Now you say, well, did this happen real slow? Well, no, this was from a big storm. Big storms will take a whole bunch of stuff all at once. I mean, there's just tons of this coastal erosion stuff in there. Oh, let's look at something else. Let's go back here. And let's look at mountain erosion. Mountain erosion. That's all it took. And you know what I'm looking for now, don't you? I mean, who wants to read about it? What is it? A picture's worth 1,000 words? So let's look at some pictures of mountain erosion. Have any of you ever been someplace where you've noticed where there were some trees growing and now they've fallen over the edge of a cliff down by a highway? Well, see, all of this area used to be up here, but what's eroded it? Rain. Rain and snow. Can you see how that dirt has been coming from these mountains and flowing down here? Makes for some pretty scenery too, doesn't it? You can see it right there, can't you? See how all this is turned into powder?
Wow.
Let's go right now. Okay.
Just cool stuff. Neat pictures. Okay, I have one more to show you. Since we're talking about erosion, soil erosion. This is probably what we see more of here in Missouri. Soil erosion. Images of soil erosion. There, have you seen a picture like that somewhere? Where there's a little stream going through a field? Do any of you ever see a field where some farmer raises crops, and after he harvests his crop, then all of a sudden these little ditches start to form, and he comes along with his machinery and fills them in and plants a new crop, and then next year he has to fill in some more ditches. Where's the dirt going? The water is washing it downstream and it's going into a lake, a river, or a pond. Have any of you seen a place around your house where water runs down and washes a little indentation? That poor little plant. He took root in the wrong place, didn't he? This guy's safe for a little while, but this guy's toast. His root system is not in enough soil to do him any good. Wow. There's another case that you might see here in Missouri. There's a place in Missouri, if you want to see some erosion like some of these pictures, it's called Little Grand Canyon. Petite Grand Canyon. Have any of you seen it? Okay, have any of you seen the Grand Canyon?
I was really little.
Okay, I've seen the Grand Canyon, and I've been to the Petite Grand Canyon, and there's nothing grand. The Grand Canyon and the Petite Grand Canyon have nothing in common. The Petite Grand Canyon looks like a ditch compared to the Grand Canyon. But I went to see it because it was in a book that was published a few years ago called Missouri's Masterpieces. And there were 100 things in Missouri that everyone ought to see. And I said to my wife, you grew up in Missouri, have you seen this stuff? She goes, no. I said, well, we're going to go check it out. And she would get in the car and laugh about the things we saw. Some of them were really cool, but some of them were just crazy. Look at this. See this grassland? Okay, there's grass here, there's grass here. Can you believe this used to all be covered in grass?
Wow.
And they see this tree? See how its root system goes down? Well, next season that tree's going to be laying at the bottom of the ditch. Okay, that's enough of that. I mean, we could spend... Oops, that was the wrong thing to push. Who knows what I did now? We'll see what happens when we try to do it again, if we have time. Okay, I think that's enough erosion. Page 113 talks about longshore currents. Have any of you been to the ocean? Have any of you ever been caught in a riptide? Well, don't. Oh, it's like, that tide can't be that strong.
No, trust me, it is.
Just go to Google and type in people caught in riptides. It ought to have afterwards parentheses, stupid. Because they put up a sign that said, warning, riptide, do not go in the water. But if you get caught in one, it tells you, don't try to come back to shore. It's the water's stronger than you are. Just go along with it until it kind of wears out its effect, and then you can float to shore. But I'm not going out in the water, but some of you might need that information if you plan on going to the ocean. On page 115, it talks about the human impact on coastal processes. Now, see that picture that showed those houses falling over the edge? Did the house being built up on top of that cliff, did it cause the ocean? Did the ocean just say, let's go take away the land where they've built houses? Did building the houses cause the ocean to do that? No. So not all of this erosion stuff is caused by humans. But do we do a lot of things that cause erosion? Okay, just like right across the street here. That used to be a big pasture. In other words, that just used to be a grassland over there. The guy who owned the grassland sold it to a company that auctions cars. So the first thing they did is cover all that grassland with asphalt. So now, before they covered it, when it rained, where did the water go? Down in the soil. Where does the water go now? Well, down by County Line Road, by 155th, isn't there a pond there? Okay, That pond used to be full of huge big bass. And students from Calvary would go fishing down there and catch some big bass out of that pond. I don't think there's too many people fishing it anymore, because now the runoff from the parking lot that has fluids from cars in it has polluted the pond, as well as where the parking lot ends. Before you get to the pond, the water is coming off the parking lot so fast that it's eroding the soil. You follow me? At the end of the parking lot and washing it into the pond. And if that keeps going on long enough, eventually the pond will start to fill up with soil in the bottom, and it'll become a very shallow pond. It won't be as deep as it was to begin with. And it could even eventually, I mean, if there's enough dirt flowing into it from the creek, from the roadbed upstream, that there could be enough dirt flowing in it that eventually it fills the whole thing up. And all you have is just the water running over the highway, which means when they have a big rain, there could be some flooding down there. So yes, humans do impact the erosion process, but it's not all humans doing that. Okay, it's time for us to start chapter 4. If there's something else in chapter 3 that didn't make sense and you need some help understanding it, let me know. Chapter 4 talks about biogeochemical cycles and the biosphere. What is that? Well, let's turn the page and see if we can figure it out. Page 122, biogeochemical cycles. Okay, there's a picture on page 123. And there's the hydrologic cycle. What is that? Does that look like water evaporating and going up into the air and coming back as rain? Evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and runoff. What do those words sound like? Rain-related words on page 123. Well, guess what all that stuff is called together? This flow is called hydrologic cycles. So that's one of the biogeochemical cycles. How many cycles are listed in that picture? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you see those 5 cycles? Now, have you studied the hydrologic cycle any place in life before? Water evaporates, goes up into the air, turns in. Yeah, you say in the last chapter we talked about it, didn't we? About where rain comes from. Okay, and then it comes back down, and then it evaporates and goes back up and comes back down. And on page 123 it talks about a water budget. Any idea what a water budget is? Hey, on your little farm where you have a spring, Anna, do you get all of your water for your house from your spring?
It's too tiny.
Now, see, if you wanted to go off of the city water or the county water and just live off of your spring, you would have to budget your water usage to be no more than what your spring produces.
Yeah, I think we used to, and in one drought season, I think we used up almost all of it. So I think we would.
Because when you have a drought, it's like there's no rain to replenish the supply for a spring, so it's gone. So it's like, well, now we have to pay to hook up to city water. And once you hooked up to city water, then flush toilets and showers became the thing of the day.
Yeah.
See, folks, you have to understand, growing up on a farm in Oklahoma, when I got on a bus, and they didn't have a high school in the little part of the country where I lived, just grade schools. And when I got on a bus and went to high school, they made me take PE, and the PE teacher made us take showers. And I, for my first time in my life, discovered a shower when I was in high school, and I'm going, whoa! You go, how did you bathe prior to taking a shower?
Bucket.
What if I told you I didn't? Ew, that's disgusting. Well, when I did get ready to take, to get clean, you said a bucket? That would work when we were some places, but we had a big tub at our house that you would fill up with water and set the tub in front of the stove, and you would get in that tub, soap down and rinse off and dry off, and whoever put the water in the tub first got to use it first. You go, gross, I think I'm going to dump that water out and make a fresh tub for myself. You'll think twice about that after you carry that water. When I discovered a shower in high school, I'm going, whoa! This is like inventing a car when you've been riding a horse. And I went home and told my dad, I'm building me one of those. And I went out behind our house and built me a little enclosure and got a big barrel and put a spigot on it with a shower head. I would climb up there with a ladder and fill it up with buckets of water in the morning. Guess what the sun did all day long while I was working? It warmed up the water. And I would come home at the end of the day from working out in the field all dirty, and I would go step in my shower, turn it on, and just laugh because everybody else had to share a tub in the house. Well, that didn't last very long, because I'd go out in the morning and fill my shower up, come home in the afternoon after working out in the field and being all dirty, step in the shower, turn it on, and there's no water. And I'm going, I filled this up this morning, Mom, what's going on? And she goes, well, the girls and I wanted, it was hot today and we wanted to take a shower. I'm going, so why didn't you fill it back up with water? Well, it's too far up the ladder and it's too heavy for the girls to carry. I say, you know what? You girls have been staying cool without my shower all these years, and now that I build a shower, you're taking it? And she goes, well, talk to your father about it. Oh boy. My father was so in love with my mother. If it came to a choice between her using my shower or her getting her own water, what do you think my dad said? Just deal with it, boy. Just deal with it. She can use your water if she wants to. So then I just knew. Come home in the afternoon, go out to the well, get some fresh water, dump in the barrel. What's that water like coming out of your spring, Anna? How would you like to take a shower in that water? I'm telling you, cold water showers are no fun. But we had a shower at our house after I went to high school and discovered what it was like. I said, I'm building one of those. The only thing I couldn't do was build an indoor toilet like they had at school. And when I first came to Calvary to go to school, when my friends learned that we had an outhouse where I grew up on the farm, he thought I was lying. He didn't believe it. So he went with me over a spring break to visit one time. We're sitting in the house and he goes, where's the bathroom? I said, right out there, about 25 yards away from the house. He goes, I think I'm going to stay in town with your brother at his apartment. I had a married brother, an older brother who was married, and I said, hey, do whatever you want. And now that I've lived in town for a few years, what happens when I go to a sporting event where the only facility is a porta potty? People, that's as close as city people get to an outhouse. And I don't use porta potties. I get in the car and drive to the nearest McDonald's and use a real restroom. I mean, I'm as cityfied as anybody now. But just understand that this water budget thing says, and can you see where if showers and toilets use most of the water, if you want to budget your water because we have a drought or because we don't have a very big spring supplying water for us, you end up turning to your attention to saying, so we look for another way to dispose of waste, and we look for another way to stay clean and bathe. And have any of you heard of a sponge bath? Something you give little babies? Well, an adult can take one of those too. Okay, so let's see. We just looked at the hydrologic cycle on page 123. Have you figured out what the nitrogen cycle is? There's tons of nitrogen in the air, but if the plants are going to get it, it has to be absorbed by plants and used by the plants, and then it goes back into the air. Have you figured out what the oxygen cycle is? Take a deep breath. What came in your mouth? Oxygen. What came out of your mouth?
Carbon dioxide.
Now, if we were all outside and we stood under a tree and I said, take a deep breath, we suck it in and you go, wow, that sure tastes fresh. Yeah, because we're under a tree. What's that tree doing?
Saying the same thing.
Except it's taking in what? Carbon dioxide, the stuff that we just blew out, and it's giving off oxygen. Is that pretty cool? You mean to say I can stand under that tree and just feel good because I'm getting fresh oxygen right from the tree, and he's taking all my carbon dioxide and turning it back into oxygen, and he's growing. I mean, isn't that a neat thing that God put it together like that? That's why I have lots of trees growing around my house. And people come to visit, and with all these trees around there, we sit outside and they say, you know, it's just so refreshing out here. Now, it is refreshing to see it, the beauty of it, but they don't even realize that part of it is breathing pure, fresh oxygen made by the trees around us. And they're soaking up the carbon dioxide. The contrast to that would be, we close all these doors. Have you ever walked into a classroom where every seat in the room was filled up by the previous class, and for an hour and a half they've been in there with the door closed, soaking up all the oxygen and filling the room with carbon dioxide and whatever else they have in their system? And you open the door and you go, whoa, this room needs some what? Fresh air. And that's just part of this process. So that's this oxygen cycle. The carbon cycle is what? You burn stuff and carbon goes into the air, and then carbon is taken out of the air and back into the earth, and it runs through these cycles. And without the water, none of it would happen. So we have to keep tabs on our water budget. Did you know in California, I'm sorry, they've had a drought that's been about 10 years long. And they were at the place to where their reservoirs were so low that they were telling people you can't water your grass anymore. And we have to start looking for ways to save water, because if the drought continues, we're going to be in serious trouble. They even talked about maybe having to put in some offshore desalting plants. Have you ever been in a country where you don't get enough rainwater to support everybody for your water budget, so you have to have plants next to the ocean where they pump salt water out of the ocean and then desalt it, take the salt out of it before they put it in the pipes to run to your house? Have any of you ever been someplace like that? Okay. I went to visit some relatives on an island in Greece, and they had, their rooftop was built to collect water, fresh rainwater that they kept in a cistern in their basement underground, and they used that water for cooking and for bathing. And they did their laundry with it. But for flushing their toilets, they used the water from the desalting plant. And I said, why don't you cook with it? Because it leaves too much salt in all of our utensils. They go ahead, turn the tap on and taste it. It won't hurt you, it just tastes bad. And I turned it on and I go, ew, this tastes like salt water. Yeah, because they don't to take all the salt out of it would be too expensive. So they take enough salt out of it where you can still use it, because they don't get enough rain to have a budget for water to do everything. So they have to get water from the ocean. And if the drought would have continued, California would be doing that in the next 2 or 3 years. But guess what just happened this winter? Does anyone know what just happened? Out in the Rocky Mountains, that little map I just handed out with the Rocky Mountains, all of the reservoirs that California uses to tap for their drinking water and for their water usage, all of those reservoirs are now full. So the drought, so to speak, has ended. But what has all that rain and snow caused in California? Have any of you seen pictures of California flooding? Just Google California flooding and you see pictures of what happens with all that rain coming down. But all that rain has replenished the water supply that they need. Page 124 has a picture of the hydrologic cycle. Probably, let's see, all of you, have you studied this underground stuff, this water below ground? The underground streams and rivers? I mean, I don't know why I didn't think of this, but my grandfather used to live about 10 miles from a river. And he said he needed a new water well. And I thought, I lived in a part of Oklahoma where you want to drill a water well, you have to go down 30, 40, 50 feet to find water. And sometimes you don't find it. And my dad said, that's no problem, the boys and I will dig one for you. And we went up there with shovels and started digging down in the sandy soil. And when we got down about 12 feet, there was water pooling in the bottom of our hole, because he's 10 miles from the river. And all you see water in the river, but there's all that water underground that's flowing too. I mean, it doesn't flow as fast as the river does, but there's all that underground water. And that's what this picture is showing. It's showing the underground water that most of it aren't even aware of. But you have done some of this. And I was really surprised how quick we found water, and never understood why till I studied this in geography later on. But all of you have done this. Haven't you been at the seashore where you get a little bit away from the water and you start digging down in a hole, and after you dig down so far, once your hole is below the surface of the water or the lake or whatever, water starts gurgling up in the bottom of your hole. The one that you might not know much about is, okay, you know about evaporation, don't you? That if you put a bucket of water outside in the yard on a hot day, it will eventually evaporate. Well, you know what all those trees do that I have around my house? Oh, and there's evapotranspiration from irrigation. That would be one to talk about. Okay, if you have anyone plant a garden where you raise tomatoes, and you go out and water your tomatoes, and then they soak up all the water, so the next day you water them again. But while they're soaking up water, they're making tomatoes, so you're glad to keep watering them. Well, guess what? Some of the water that you put out in your tomato garden evaporated. Some of it went into the plant and went into the tomato plant, but a lot of it went right through the plant, right through the leaves, back into the air. And that's called, what do they call that? Transpiration. Transpiration. And it's really cool to think about this. These big trees out here, okay, they're soaking water out of the ground and transposing it back into the atmosphere. And the amount of water that one big tree will put into the air is like 250 gallons a day. That's an amazing amount of water being sucked out of the ground and put in the air. That's why my grass is always crying for water, because all the trees are soaking it up and putting it in the air. But I prefer the trees to the grass because they make it feel so good to sit outside. But grass does that same thing. And that's called transpiration. Evapotranspiration and local water budgets on page 125. Okay, basically, maybe let me illustrate it this way. I think there's time for this. I'm not on city sewers because I live in a part of Raymore where everyone has a septic system. Anyone know what a septic system is? Instead of having water go from our sinks and toilets into the sewage system for the city of Raymore, it goes through a pipe into a big concrete tank where bacteria work on it, and then the water runs down into a lagoon. Have you ever seen a big lagoon where it's got like green moss on top, and the birds and the frogs and stuff just love it because it's such a rich environment? Well, that's the waste from our house, wastewater from our house being processed. But when we first built that lagoon, because the septic tank originally had pipes running out into the pasture, but the pipes all kind of got clogged up because the pasture's got a lot of clay in it, so the soil wasn't good soil for a septic system. So I said, let's build a lagoon. So we built this lagoon, and my wife said, make sure it's a long ways from the house. So we built this lagoon, and so now it fills up with water. But sometimes when it rains, it gets too full of water, so I have to have pumps to pump it out. But in the summertime, a bunch of trees have grown up around it now. In the summertime, the trees will soak water out of the lagoon at such a rate that it uses up the water as fast as we put it in there. Is that pretty amazing? That you can have just a natural system. And I just wonder, do most people with lagoons know that if they planted trees around their lagoon, the trees would suck the lagoon dry? And it would cause them, and it would even help wildlife. But it's interesting stuff to see what goes on. In fact, page 126 talks about vegetation and the hydrologic cycle, and it shows a bunch of hydrological cycle things. Although when you look at that on Google, it's not always that exact. But basically, well, it says here, a single large tree can transpire 1,000 liters or 35 cubic feet, and 1 cubic foot is 7.5 gallons. So what's 35 times 7.5? About 250 gallons per day in warm weather. About twice the volume of a typical refrigerator. 250 gallons a day. Okay, let's see. I've got some stuff here. On page 128, it says deforestation in the Amazon basin. When you understand what trees do in terms of providing oxygen and transposing water, any idea why they're deforesting the Amazon? Why they're cutting down all those trees in the Amazon? Why would anyone want to cut down trees in the Amazon? Maybe I should ask another question. why would anybody want to cut down all the trees that used to grow in the state of Missouri and the state of Arkansas?
To expand.
What?
To expand.
What were we building with all those trees we cut down?
Residential homes and roads.
My grandfather's brother, his job was to be a railroad tie inspector, and he lived in Arkansas, and they would buy railroad ties from farmers, except they would buy the tree that was the right size to make a railroad tie, and then they would cut it down to railroad tie size, and he would grade them as to which ones were usable and which ones had to be discarded because there was something wrong with the tree they made the tie from. So all of these people who had trees in southern Missouri and in Arkansas, they were cutting their trees down because the railroad was paying big bucks. Have any of you ever seen a railroad, how they build a railroad track? There are huge. Have any of you ever seen a railroad tie at a lumber yard for sale? They're about this big and about, what, 10 or 12 feet long? They're huge and they're heavy. And they're filled with creosote to make them last longer. Well, those things are put on the ground, one next to another one, about this far apart. So it's almost like, it's not quite a solid floor of wood that they lay the railroad on, but it's pretty close to it. And they built that railroad all the way from Missouri clear out to California, and the trees in Colorado don't make good railroad ties. So they had to get all of their railroad ties from Missouri and Arkansas to build those roads, those railroads. But it's been so long ago, a lot of those trees have grown back, but we still use those trees. We cut them to build houses, to build roads, to build things with. So people are cutting down the Amazon jungle for the use of the lumber. And it says here on page 128 that 11,000 square miles per year are being deforested or being cleared. And I did the math, and according to this, in 200 years, the Amazon basin will be deforested. In 200 years. Now wait a minute. Do any of you know how people who live in the Amazon, Amazonians, how they farm? They go into an area and they cut down the trees so the sunlight can get there and cause their crops to grow. And the trees they cut down, they use them to build houses, for wood for fires, and then they plant crops in the land. But after a few years of raising crops in the land, it depletes, the soil's not very rich in nutrients. It depletes the nutrients. So and plus they've used up all the lumber they cut down for firewood. So they move to another part of the forest and cut down another section to make a new garden. But how long does it take the old section that was cut down to grow back into trees again? In other words, the people who are talking about the Amazon will be deforested in 200 years. The part that they cut down in 50 years will have grown back again. You follow what I'm talking about? Why didn't somebody factor that in when they told us about this? Oh, well, they don't want us to know everything. They just want us to know enough to say we should be opposed. I was talking in the barbershop the other day when they were cutting my hair. They were complaining about how the rules for health care are being changed. And they said, I'm in favor of universal health care. I said, do you mean free health care for everybody in America? And she said, yes. And I said, so if it's free, does that mean all the doctors and nurses don't get paid? I mean, how else would it be free? Say, well, no, they would get paid. The government would pay them. Well, where does the government get their money to pay doctors and hospitals and nurses? You don't know? Okay, you have a job. Look at your paycheck. The money they take out, that's where the government gets their money. She goes, well, yeah, but it would be cheaper than paying out of my pocket for it. And I said, would it? And she said, well, some of the people have talked about Canada has universal health care and Finland has universal health care. And I said, you know, I did some research on the health care in Canada and health care in Finland. Guess what the greatest complaint is in both Canada and Finland? If the government pays for all the doctors and nurses and hospitals, and you go to the doctor and you're sick, you don't get to see a doctor. The first person you see is a nurse who isn't paid as much. And the nurse says, well, you probably need to see a doctor, but let's see. On his calendar, since there's only one doctor here for the whole county, you can't see him for a month. You go, well, but if these chest pains could be a heart attack, well, heart attack or not, it'll be a month before you can see the doctor. Now, if you live in Canada and they tell you that, and you live on the border, you get in your car and drive where? To the United States, where you can pay to see a doctor that very day who will say, yes, you need a bypass, and he'll put you in the hospital and do it tomorrow. You understand how universal health care keeps the cost down? You don't get it right away because they couldn't afford to give it to you like we do in our capitalistic healthcare system. And she goes, I never thought of that. Now, why aren't the people who are selling this giving us, why don't people give us all the information? And by the way, this is on both sides of political issues. I find that conservative people don't give me all the information that I need to see the whole picture, and neither do the liberal people, because they both have an agenda that they're trying to promote. So just realize that some of this deforestation in the Amazon is going to restore itself. Just like the forest here in Missouri. In fact, they still harvest trees in Missouri, but they harvest them in such a way that when a farmer goes in and cuts down some trees, then the first thing he does is plant some new ones so that in 20, 30, 40 years, they'll have some new trees to harvest. So basically all those trees that were cut down to make the railroad, it's been so long ago when they built the railroad that those trees have all grown back again, unless the people who cleared the land decided to use it for something else and keep trees from growing. I mean, I live on 5 acres, and the people who lived there before I did had horses in the pasture, but I just let my pasture go, just let nature run its course, and I've got trees popping up everywhere. But when they had horses out there, if a tree started growing, anyone know what the horses do to a tree? They eat it up and kill it. But if there's no horses out there, then the trees just grow, and pretty soon I'm going to have a pasture full of trees. And I said to my wife, if I'd have thought about it when we first moved there, I would have planted a bunch of pecan trees in the pasture. So what would I have? Pecans, because they cost so much at the store. Too late now, I didn't think about
But they're a ton of problems to shell.
What?
They're a ton of problems to shell, though. They're like more trouble than they're worth.
They are? So you'll go buy them from the store? Is that why they cost so much? Because it's so hard to get them out of the shell?
Because you have to like break the shell open, and that has a machine, and then you have to like take the shells off, and that takes another machine. Then you have to take the tiny shell off, and that takes another.
I am so glad to hear this, because I've been feeling so bad that I didn't plant those pecan trees. And now I'm going to tell my wife, hey, it was too much trouble anyway. I planted a plum tree and a peach tree, 2 plum trees and 2 peach trees. All 4 of those trees are dead. The bugs got to them. Okay. Page 129 talks about the carbon and oxygen cycle, but we'll have to save that for Monday. So I'll put this stuff in here, and we'll pick up with it on Monday.
You get to keep those? These?
Yes? Yes, you get to keep those.